Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença and today we're going to do a to-do app using Flask. If you want to get the solution on how to do this to-do app and also an ebook on how to become a developer as fast as possible, click on the description below. So today we're going to do a to-do app using Flask, okay? The previous video that we did was a to-do app using JavaScript, so I highly recommend you to take a look on that video before, okay? So I think some concepts will be clear for you. And also I recommend you to take a look on CS50 web track from 2020, because here they explain better how you can use Flask, okay? So we will use a framework in Python called Flask, which allows us to write a web server with many features, okay? So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a folder here called Flask, okay? And we're going to create this application.py file. And so why is this? By reading the documentation and experimenting, we can write our first Flask application with return something for /route, and in our terminal we can cd into our folder and run Flask run, which will find our application.py file and run it, okay? So we will open the URL and see the returning thing that we're going to do. So the thing is, the application.py it's going to store all the information of our application. So every file that we're going to create, we have to it's going to be all centralized in the application.py. I know it seems confusing, but while we do the to-do app, we're going to understand. So the first thing that we have to do, we have to import some things from the Flask library, okay? So we're going to import Flask, render template, and request. I know by now you don't understand why, but you're going to get this idea why we did the project. So the first thing, we have to create an app using Flask. So here we're explaining that we're creating an app using Flask, okay? This is Python. Where we are, as we can see here, is a file of Python. So that's why we have to create this app Flask to explain that we're going to use the Flask, okay? And now, as we saw before, we have to create the routes, okay? So each route, it's going to be displayed by one URL, and in this each route, it's going to have one page for our project, okay? So what are the pages that we want to do? Here it's one to-do app that I already did in Flask. So we have the default route that is going to display all the tasks that we want, and when we click in here, we go to add a new task on the to-do app. So here we can add a new task. So for example, study Flask. Okay, and when we submit, it's going to appear in here in our to-do app. So this is what we're going to do. So as we saw, we have the default route and have another route that is /add. So that's what we're going to create. We're going to create here app.route. And here inside the parentheses, we're going to set what is going to be the URL. So this is the default route, so we're just going to use the /. And we have to define a function that this definition here is going to explain what is going to appear in this route here. So this function I'm going to call tasks, okay? And by now we're just going to return a string tasks. And we have to create another route, as we saw in my project, that is going to be with what? Here we have the /add, okay? So here, this is the /add, and we have to define here as the add function. And by now it's just going to return add a new task, okay? So let's save it and let's do here Flask run to run our project. Here we receive an URL, we click and we open, and by now we have here the default route that is tasks, and if we put here /add, we have another page here that is the add a new task. So by now our application has two pages, okay? So our project has two pages, the tasks and the add a new task. Now we have to work with the HTML that we're going to use, because we want to use this random template to render what the content that is going to appear in each page. So in this case, I'm going to show you here. We're going to create here. Where is it? So let's read this part. It turns out that we can have templates for our templates, since many of our pages might have a similar HTML code around its content. We will create a layout.html and add a specific block inside the block tag. Then our other files like index.html can use the template with extends layout.html and only have the content block for the body. I know it seems confusing, but you can check this again later, okay? But basically, we're going to create an HTML called layout, and remember, here we create a new folder. Inside the Flask folder, we're going to create a templates folder where we're going to add our HTML files inside these templates. So the layout.html, it's going to be our main file, our mother file of HTML, where we're going to write the content that has to have in an HTML. And in the test.html and add.html, we're going to just just going to use this extends layout.html, and we're only going to have the content block for the body. Why? Because we're going to have a layout.html, and this layout.html, it's going to be the templates of our templates. Okay, I know it seems confusing, but this saves a lot of time for us. So here, the structure of HTML, we have to start with doc type HTML. Now we have to use the HTML length English. Okay, I explain better the HTML on the video of JavaScript to do. Okay, that's why I recommend you to take a look, because there we explain JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. And in here we're going to put title. And what's this title that is going to appear? It's this title that appears in the tab, okay? So we're going to put here title tasks, okay? And in the head, we're going to, in the body, we're going to do what CS50 explains to us. We're going to add a special block inside the body tag. And what is this special block? It's this notation here, so block body, okay? And then we're going to do an end block, okay? So what is going to happen? In the layout, we already created the specifications that the HTML requires when you want to use. And in the test.html, in the add.html, we're just going to write things inside of this block body, okay? We don't need to write all of these lines again. We just need to put this block body and end block in the files, and we're going to write inside. So in the tasks, the first thing that we want to do, it's what? We're going to use this extends. So check this out. We're going to use this extends layout.html because we're going to use the layout.html as template, okay? So extends layout.html. So what this line is saying, it's saying that we're going to grab the information that we have in here and we're going to use on the test.html. And we have to open up our block body, okay? And we have to end the block, okay? Why are we putting this? Because we have this block body and we end the block. This means that we're going to write inside of this part of the layout.html, okay? And what do we want to have in our, let me put here. And what do we want to have in our default route? It's not this one. Oops, we cannot have two terminals open. So let me put here. So what do we want to have in our default route? We want to have the to-do tasks, okay? And in the other, we want to add a new task. So for example, study JavaScript. We want to appear in here, study JavaScript, okay, as a task on our to-do. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add here an H1 called tasks, okay? And we're going to create an unordered list where each list item, it's going to be the task that we have to do. So by now I'm going to use this item 2 and list item 3. Okay, and as we can see here, we have this link that if we click on create a new task, we go to the add route. So we're going to put this in here. So ahref, it's equals to what? What is the URL for this? If we go to our application, we have here that it's this /add route. So we're going to put in here, so /add route, and we're going to write create a new task. Okay, so when the person clicks on the create a new task, we go to the add task route, and that's what we're going to do. And what do we have in the add? What do we need to have in the add.html? We have to have this form here. But before, we have to do the same thing as we did in test.html, that we have to do this extend layout and the block body. So let's do this. So in here we're going to do extend layout.html. Okay. And here we have to put the block body and what? And block. Okay. And what do we have to have inside our add route? A form where we have the input text and the input submit. Okay. I'm passing this faster because I already explained this on JavaScript to do. So check this out, because there we explain HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, and JavaScript. Okay, so we have an input type text, and we have another input type submit that is going to create for us the button. Okay, so by now we have these two, and we have to do what? We have to say in our application.py. So remember, the application.py will contain all the files that we're going to use. So by now, when we do this part here, so let me open up this Flask run. So by now, when we use here, what do we have? When we open up our project, we have here the HTMLs, but we're not calling them in the application.py. So when we open up the page, we keep receiving these tasks and this add a new task. Why? Because we didn't, these two things here, because we didn't call the test.html and the add.html in here. And how are we going to call it? We're going to use the render template. Okay, so here we're going to put return render template. Okay, and here we're going to put test.html, and in here we're going to do the same, but we're going to render template, and what's going to be the file? It's the add.html. Okay, so let's run our code and check what is happening. So we can come up in here. What is happening? So template not found, layout.html. Okay, so I wrote this HTML, and here it's layouts.html. I miswrote in here. That's why it didn't work. So let's run this again. Let me close and run this again. Ctrl C, Flask, run. And let's open up here. So by now we have what? We have our tasks. Okay, this is our test.html, our default route. And we have our unordered list with item 1, 2, and 3, and we have the link. If we click the link, we go to the form here where we have the input type text and the submit button. Okay, so far so good, it's working. We have the HTML done. But now we have to work with the informations that we're going to include in our to-do task, because in here, if we write something, so for example, study Flask, if we type submit here, it's not going to happen anything, right? Because the idea was we want to type something, and this something we want to appear in here in our tasks. Okay, But by now this is not working. Why? Because we're not defining in our form what's the action that the data has to do. So for example, let's put here form HTML 3 schools, just to make things clear. I already explained this, but I'm going to explain this again. So here we have the form, okay, the inputs that we already know, but we have to give the actions. Let me put form action. So the form action attribute. On submit, send the form data to a file named action blah 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 to process the input. So here we have to use action, we have to give an action to explain what to do when we submit the input in the form. So we're not doing this in our project by now, right? We're not sending this data information to any place. So now we're going to start working with Flask itself. So we're going to use this action attribute, okay? And what's the route that is going to work with the action attribute? It's the route add action, okay? So here we're going to put add. And here, I know it seems complicated, but we're going to use a method. When we do a form action, we can have a method get, okay, or a method post. And what is the difference? The get, this get method here, is a request method used by default, and it's used when you want to get a page. So if you want to get a page, we use the method get. But we have another type that it's called method post. And what post means? Post means you're trying to send data to the server. So what we want to do? So let's think. We want to use the page, we want to use this form action to send we want to send the data from the server, right? Because we want to write something in our form here, and we want to send this information to our to-do app. That's what the method that we're going to do is the method equals post. I know it seems confusing, so take a look on, so search here HTML get and post method, so get and post method, for example, and you're going to understand. So get is used to request data from a specified resource, and post is used to send data to a server to create or update a resource. So in this case, we want to create or update a resource, right? We want to create a new task in our tasks of to-do. So in here, we're going to put this action, and just to make things better, to look prettier, I'm going to put here a placeholder to explain to the user what he has to put in here. So in the type input, I'm going to put here a placeholder. This is just about style, okay? So add new task, okay? So when we run this again, so let's refresh here. Actually, let me refresh here. So when we run this again, we'll go to create a new route. So why it's not working, let me close and run again. I think it's going to work. So now when we run this here, it's going to appear this placeholder, add a new task. So we're making the life of the user more easier, right? Because we're adding an information on what the user has to put here as input. So now that we did this method post, we have to work with this information in the application, okay? So we are saying that this form action is going to be worked on the action of route add. So we're going to work with this information now. So we have two cases in here, right? That I said before. We have two methods, and we're going to write these two methods here. We have the method get, okay, and the method post. And what the two method means, so I'm going to write in here. So the get method is a request method used by default and is used when you want to get the page. So if you want to get the page, okay, we just use this get method, and we're going to render the page. So here we're using the get method, if you think about, because we're getting the page that we want to render. So in this case, we're getting the method, the page also, okay? So since we have this if and else, if it's get method or if it's a post, we're going to do an if and else in here. So we're going to do if request.method equals get, what do we want to do? We want to return the random template. So if the request method is get, we want to get the page. So we're going to use the render template like we did in here. And else, okay. And what's the other case? Post means you're trying to send data to the server. And when this post is going to be triggered, when we click the submit button. So the get method here is going to be triggered when we click to go. So let's go here. The get method is going to be triggered when we click to go to the page, okay? And the post method is going to be triggered when we click to submit the button, okay? So this is going to be our else case. And what's going to be the else? Now we have to work with this information that we're going to grab from the form. So we know here that we're going to receive from the form this input type task, okay? But now we're going to grab this information here to use in the application. So how do we grab this information? We have to give a name for this input, and I'm going to call task, okay? And this name is going to be the one that we're going to use here in the application.py. So by now, all this line here, input type task, we're going to call as task because we give a name as task. So in here, we're just going to do what? First, we want to grab the information from the form, okay? So how do we do this? We're going to create a variable here called to do, and we're going to get the information from the form using this request.form.get task. And why are we using task? Because task is the name of the input of the new task, okay? And this request form.get is saying what? You're going to the form and you're going to get the value of this variable here, okay? That it's our input in this case. And we're going to store this value of this new task in the to-do variable, okay? And then, so let me put a comment here and I think it's going to make it better. So get the input from the user. So this thing here is doing what? We're in the application.py, we're grabbing the information that we received from the HTML, okay? Now what we have to do? We have to add this new task to the to-dos list that we are going to render on this route here. But to do this, we have to do something first. We have to create a route. We have to create in here. After here, we have to create this to have a list of to-dos, okay? We want to create this, so I'm going to create to-dos equals an empty list, because we want to store the new tasks to our to-do list here, right? Because by now, if we check, we are displaying what? I think it ran, so it's okay. So because by now we are displaying what? We are displaying list item 1, item 2, and item 3, but we want to display here the tasks that we are going to add in our to-do, okay? So that's why we're creating this, to have a list of to-dos, and we're going to add this new task to the to-dos list that we create in here. And how are we going to do this? We're going to grab to-dos, that is the name of the list, okay? And we're going to use the append. And what we're going to, so we want to add this new task to the to-dos list. So what we want to append in the to-dos list? We want to append the to-do variable, okay? That is our new task. And after all of this, we want to redirect the user to the page that has the to-dos, okay? and we're going to return redirect this. So since we're using redirect in here, we have to add redirect in here because it's another import that we're grabbing from Flask, okay? So far so good. What we're doing when we are on the add route, we're going to have two cases here. The first scenario is when we enter in the get page, so it's going to render the template HTML. And the other case, the other scenario is when we click the submit button, okay? So I'm going to put in here. This is going to happen when we enter on the add page, and this is going to happen when we click the submit button. Okay, I think now it's going to get clear. So when we click the submit button, we're going to grab the new task information from the HTML input. We're going to add this new task to the to-dos list, okay? And then we're going to redirect the user to the page that has the to-dos. So let's save it and let's see how it goes. So clear, Flask run. And let's check. So let's open up here. Let me close all of this one. So by now, this is not changing anything because we didn't change this part. And now we're going to add a new information. So study Flask, okay? And we type submit and we redirect, so it's redirecting, but oh no, it's not appearing here, the new task in our tasks list. And why is that? Because we didn't change this part of the HTML, okay? So by now we're displaying item 1, item 2, item 3. We're not displaying the to-dos, the to-dos list. And how are we going to do this? So we have to add here as context to-dos equal to-dos. And why to-dos equals to-dos? This first to-dos here means about this to-dos here. And the other to-dos is going to be the name that we're going to call here inside. So then we have to go to the task.html and we're going to take out this, okay? And we're going to do an iteration. We're going to do a for loop in each task on our to-do list. So since we're passing here to-do, we're going to do here what? An iteration. So for to-do in to-dos, okay, so for each to-do in the to-dos list, we're going to do what? We're going to create a list item with the value of this to-do, okay? That's how we do. So when we use this, we're saying what? We're doing an iteration for all to-do in the to-dos list. And in here, we're just displaying the value of to-do. That's how we display values. We have to use double curly brackets, okay? And then we have to end our for, okay? So this way, we're going to display the information that we want. So let's check in here. Let me do Flask run again. And let's check what happens. So here, by now we have nothing. And why would we don't have any to-do in our tasks page? Because we didn't add any to-do in our to-dos list, right? So now let's create here study Flask and let's submit. When we submit, now it appears here study Flask. So that's what is happening. So this is doing for to-do and to-dos, and it's going to display the information that we have in our to-dos. Why the first case is empty? Because our to-do is empty, and then we start appending here, okay, in our add.html. So now let's create a new one. So study HTML, and when we click submit, it's going to add here, and we can do this for a lot of things. So study Python, and when we submit, it's going to appear in here. So far so good. Our project is almost done. We just have to do one thing that has left, that is the same idea as we did in JavaScript. If we click here submit, it's going to put here an empty task, but we don't want this to happen. We don't want to have an empty task. So now we have to work with the submit button here. And we're going to work now, we're going to add in the submit button here, we're going to work a little with JavaScript. That's why it's important for you to watch JavaScript before before Flask to do, because now we're going to use JavaScript, the same idea as we did before. So since we want to add a JavaScript thing in here, we're going to use the tag script, okay? And we're going to write the JavaScript language inside this script, and the compiler will understand. So the first thing we want to do the same thing as we did in the to-do JavaScript. So I'm going to open up here. Okay, this is the to-do JavaScript. And what we did, oh, it's not this one, it's this file here, the test.js. What we did, we created this, the situation, the submit has an empty value. So we're going to create this new task, add event listener, key up, and we're going to enable or disable the submit button, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So first of all, we have to use document.querySelector. And what the document.querySelector will do? The document.querySelector will grab an information from the HTML, and it's going to store this information to what we want to do. So here, what's the query selector that we want to grab? We don't want to the submit button display here an empty task, right? So we're going to grab here the task that it's our input. Okay, that's why we use hash, because we're saying we're giving this, we have to actually give an ID so JavaScript can understand what is task. So this task thing here is grabbing the input with ID task, okay, that is this input type text. And what we're going to do, we're going to use the onKey up. And what is onKey up? Let's search here. So onKey up JavaScript. And what is onKey up event? It's this. So onKey up event occurs when the user releases a key on the keyboard. So when we write anything on the keyboard, so if we type here any character here, it's going to understand this as a key up, okay? And we're going to create a function. And let's open the function here. And what we're going to do, we're going to do the same idea as we did here. We're going to create if where there is nothing typed in the input, turns the submit button disable. Where there is when there is something typed in the input, turns the submit button enable. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do an if condition. So if document.querySelector, and what's the query selector in here? We're going to check if this is empty or not. So if task, forgot to use the single quotation mark. So if this input here task is equals to empty, what we're going to do, we're going to get the document, we're going to get the button, so document.querySelector, and here I'm going to give an ID equals submit, so the JavaScript can understand which part of the HTML we're talking about. So we're going to set the submit button, disable, okay, disable equals true. So what are we doing here? So if you remember the JavaScript to-do app, we're doing this part. So if new task, and what's new task? It's the document query selector task. So if new task is equals empty, we're going to get the submit button, okay, and we're going to set this equals to true. So we're going to disable the button, and now we have the else case. It's just a different way of doing this, but we already learned this, how to do this on the JavaScript video. Query selector hash submit dot disable. So if this task is not empty, we're going to turn the button enable, so the disable will be false. Okay, so that's what we're doing. It's the same thing as we did on tasks.js, so take a look on JavaScript video. So by now we have everything working fine. So let's run the Flask run again. So Flask run again, and let's click here, open, and let's check. So by now we have nothing, right? Because our to-dos list is empty. We're going to create a new task. So we forgot to do something before. So by now the submit button is not disabled. Why? Because we have to give here a default case for the disable button. So the same thing as we did in test.js, the default case when the page loads, the button has to be disabled. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, let me copy this comment, and that's what we're going to do first. And we're going to do what? We're going to do document.query selector. Okay, this is what? This is hash submit to grab the submit button. Disabled is equals to true. Okay, so let's run this again. Let me open up here, clear, Flask run, and let's see, when we click here, we are open up here, it's an empty to-do app, right? We don't have any task. When we click here, if you check, since we have nothing here, the submit button is disabled. Now if we run anything, if we write anything here, it's going to change. Now it's enabled, so let's put here study Flask. Okay, submit, and now appears the study Flask in our to-do app. Create again, it's disabled. If we write something, study HTML, and we click submit, and it's going to create. So our to-do app is working fine in our Flask. Our to-do app made by Flask is doing fine, and now you are more comfortable with this new tool. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this content, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.